December 7th, 1941. Some of you may recall those events in which Japanese fighter pilots took on suicide missions in the early morning hours and attacked the naval base in Pearl Harbor, sinking many battleships, destroying the majority of the fleet, killing many lives. You may also recall November 22nd, 1963, the day in which President John F. Kennedy was driving through his motorcade through the city of Dallas. He was shot and killed. We also remember days like January 28th, 1986, when the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted up into another normal space mission, with a few mere moments later, it exploded as it ascended into the heavens, killing everyone on board. These are all moments when time stood still. Images now captured in time, yet still ignites the emotions as if we were still experiencing it. These moments when experience created a unified gasp and left people speechless, wondering if what we are experiencing is really happening and fearing what will happen next. 15 years ago, September 11th, 2001, became another day that we will never forget, as planes crashed into the Pentagon, the World Trade Center, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It was on that day when we stood in silence and stood in fright when the two towers of the World Trade Center fell to the ground. On that day, and the days that followed, nothing else in the world seemed to matter. People were all too saddened, shocked, and in disbelief to even continue their normal activities, even hundreds of miles away. On September 15, 2001, as churches reassembled for their Sunday morning worship service, perhaps with a few more people in the congregation that day, Pastor Darren McKnight of First Baptist Church in Washington drew his church to Psalm 46. And here the psalmist writes, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake at its swelling pride. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy dwelling places of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations made an uproar. The kingdoms tottered. He raised his voice. The earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has wrought desolations in the earth. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. even though we hope and pray that we will never experience another September 11th like we did 15 years ago, we all understand that chaos and tragedy, trials and tribulations will join us on this journey of life. The question we must answer is, how do we respond when tragedy strikes? How do we respond when we get that bad word from the doctor? How do we respond when trials and tribulations enter our life, when we say it's just not fair? This morning again, as we are drawn to Psalm 46, we will conclude that as believers we have three distinct actions when tragedy strikes. As most of you know, this past spring our family took a trip to New York City. During the trip, we were not only able to enjoy the sights and sounds of the skyscraper city, but we also experienced the silence around the memorial for the World Trade Center. And not fully understanding at the time, I can now begin to bring together what it means when the psalmist writes Psalm 46. What it means to hear the words that God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Church, when tragedy strikes, let's respond with these three actions. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, church, we will not fear, though the earth should change, and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake at its swelling pride. Church, the first action we should take when tragedy strikes is we should be courageous. What does that mean? That means we will not fear. We can be courageous because God is our refuge and strength. I don't know if you've heard me say this throughout this morning, if you picked up on it, but the thing that drew my attention happened the very second word in Psalm 46. God is. I want you to underline, circle, highlight, square, starburst, whatever you want to do with that word to make sure you understand that God still is. No matter what's going on in your life, God still is. He is our refuge and our strength. He is our very present help in trouble. God still is. For the psalmist, when he writes, he makes the indication that there is no confusion on where to go for help. As I mentioned before, days like today will always draw back to memory the exact moment of time and where you were when the towers fell. Where were you when the events transpired? I remember that after philosophy class at Eureka College, not knowing what was all going on, as we finished up class, I walked over to the student union. And there everybody was, watching the TVs. As they showed the video cameras of both towers have already been impacted, and both towers are on fire. And then that moment came when those towers fell. You know exactly where you were at that point in time. The most common response was a sudden gasp, like a punch in the stomach, as you cannot believe what you're seeing on the television. As I am 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, and starting to comprehend this, there was one place that I needed to go. I had to escape that room. Didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do, but I escaped to Eureka Lake. And the stillness and the quiet of that day, because amazing point of that day is it was a glorious and beautiful day. The sun was radiant, a few spotted clouds in the sky, and you could see God's glory here in our part of the earth and experiencing the tragedy and the chaos. And sitting by the waters of the stillness of Eureka Lake, I sought my refuge and my strength in the very present help of trouble. In God. We can be courageous because God is our refuge and our strength. We can be courageous because God is ready to help. In verse 1 it says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Other scholars acknowledge that it's saying He's abundantly available. He's at the beck and call. We cannot talk about being courageous in the courageousness of September 11th without talking about the 343 firefighters and many more who entered in those buildings. The firefighters who were called Ladder Company 10 and Engine Company number 10 was just 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center. Without a doubt, they were the first to respond. When people started to evacuate the building, they started to go into the building. One of the first firefighters on site, as they were starting to set everybody up, was a fire chaplain named Father Michael Judge. He, going in, ready to offer his help as a chaplain to help direct and lead, comfort those who were coming down the stairs. Most people don't recognize or remember or realize that the World Trade Centers, both of them combined, held 50,000 people. They were so big that it had its own zip code for the World Trade Centers. Fire chaplain walked into the building before they even had anything set up, and he stationed himself at the bottom of those stairs at the main level, so when people came down, he could help them, escort them, and pray for them, help them along their way. Unfortunately, when that first tower came down, he was crushed under the rubble. Father Michael Judge became casualty number 1. As we face difficult and trying times, when our world comes crashing down, we shall not fear, because God is our very present help in trouble. Just as the firefighters were ready to go in at the beck and call, God still is. We can be courageous not only because He's a refuge and strength, not only because He's ready to help. We can be courageous because God recognizes the impact. Therefore, we will not fear, it says in verse 2, though the earth should change. We can count the ways on how the earth has changed since September 11th. When you go on an airplane flight, you know how the earth has changed. Though the mountains slip into the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake at its swelling pride, the impact of the events in our lives changes the way we live. Mountains fell that day. Each World Trade Center tower was over 100 stories tall. 1,100 feet high and crashing down. The earth should change, and though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, what you're looking at now is the memorial for the Twin Towers. That's where they stood. And what you see is that they go into the heart of the city, recognizing when they fell, It slipped into the heart of the sea. Everyone remembers when the mountains fell that day. But we shall not fear because God recognizes the impact. He knows that the earth changes. He knows that the mountains fell. He knows the sights and sounds of destruction. Though the mountains quake at its swelling pride, scholars indicate that when the World Trade Centers collapsed, it registered about a 2.0 on the Richter scale. Those living in the area saw it happen, heard the events. When we were in New York City, we took a helicopter ride, which where that last photograph was taken from. And we were able to take that helicopter ride with one other passenger, and he actually lived in Brooklyn. Matter of fact, he was a Jehovah's Witness, and Jehovah's Witnesses have their buildings right across the river from the World Trade Centers in Brooklyn. He was in their buildings at that time. And he mentioned that when they couldn't evacuate the buildings, they were told that they were now on lockdown, and he went to the top of the buildings. Him or one of his friends went to the top of the building, and he saw some debris, which was a flight manual of one of the aircrafts. Everybody recognizes the impact, the sights and sounds of destruction, but we shall not fear. Because God is our refuge and our strength. He is the very present help in our trouble. Even though the earth should change, even though the mountains slip into the sea, even though its waters roar and foam, even though the mountains quake. When tragedy strikes, we should be courageous and we should fully rely on God. There is a river, it says in verse 4, whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy dwelling places of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. We can fully rely on God because He will not be moved. God is the immovable object. No matter what trial or tribulations we face, God will not be moved. We must understand that this does not mean we will be free from the trials, we will be from tribulations, we will be free from chaos. No, that's not what He says. But He says, behold, there's a river whose stream makes glad the city of God, the holy dwelling places of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, and she will not be moved. God is able to withstand every wave, every attack. He will endure, no matter what is going on in your life. When God is your stronghold, when God is your foundation, we may shake a little bit. We may be caught off guard. We may get punched in the stomach, that same feeling that we felt some 15 years ago. But God still is strong. We can fully rely on God because not only will He not be moved, but because He will help. Look what it says in verse 5. God is in the midst of her. She will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. No matter how dark your day is, tomorrow will come, and God will be there. No matter how dark that day was, tomorrow came, and God still is. We can fully rely on God because He will not be moved, because He will help. Here's what I like the most. Verse 6 and 7, the nations made an uproar, the kingdoms tottered. And catch this. He raised his voice, and the earth went. God will be heard. A few days after the attacks on September 11th, as the firefighters and rescue workers were still on scene, hoping to recover lives still living, if not start helping and recovering the lost. Unprecedented, the President of the United States visited the site. And he grabbed the bullhorn, and the first thing he says is he apologized that he might not be able to be heard by everybody. So he starts speaking and giving comfort and encouragement to the rescue workers. When somebody in the crowd shouted, "I can't hear you," and off the cuff, the President of the United States responded saying, "I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you." And the people, he said, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon. When God speaks, the world will hear. There is no army force as great as the United States military is. There is no force that can even come close to the greatness and the power of God. And when God speaks, the earth melts away. We need to understand that when God speaks, He will be heard. When tragedy strikes, we should be courageous. When tragedy strikes, we should fully rely on God. And this morning, as we close, you will understand that when tragedy strikes, we should be still. Be still and know He is God. It's really hard for us to do. It's really hard for us to understand. I remember when I got back home that evening, one of the first thoughts in my mom's mind was I'm going to be drafted for the Army. And for a lot of people, they wanted to go do something. And our instinct is to go do something. The reality is, church, when tragedy strikes, we need to make sure we are still. And let us know that He is God. Again, like I mentioned before earlier, when that moment happened, when the world was falling apart, when we didn't know what was going on, I stepped aside from the chaos of the student union. Find myself to be still with God. No matter what, to understand that He is still God. If you didn't know this, New York City is a loud place. A lot of stuff going on. The World Trade Center area is in the heart of downtown. They are still working. They are still reconstructing. They are still building things up. So you got traffic noise, you got people noise, you've got construction noise. But as you're here at this moment, at this place, at the memorial of 9/11, all you hear is water falling down into these towers. And you recognize that every once in a while, in the busyness of our life, we need to be still and know that He is God. When we are still, we can recognize and see the works of God. In verse 9, it says, He makes the wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two, and He burns the chariots with fire. When we are still and know that He is God, we make sure that we stop trying to fight God's battles. When you are still and know that He is God, we recognize that, you know what, God, you got this. You don't need me. Church friend, maybe you're fighting a battle. Maybe you're struggling to fight a battle that only God can fight. I'm asking you to be still and trust and know that He is God. How do I know that He is God? Be still and know that I'm God, because I'm going to be exalted among the nations. He is going to be undeniably exalted. When the time comes, every knee will bow. Everybody will recognize that He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. It is undeniable. Even the demons, Scripture says, recognize that He is God. He's not only going to be undeniably exalted, He will be universally exalted. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Be still and see the works of God. Be still and know that He is God. Be still and trust His strength. 15 years later, a new tower has arisen. It shows the world of the resolve of the American people. And it is a reminder for us in the strength of God. He is our strength. He is our stronghold. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. 15 years later, a new tower has arisen. A new stronghold has been made. As we look back these past 15 years, we recognize and we understand that trials and tribulations come in our life. We realize that we will experience trials and tribulations again. We pray and hope it's not of this magnitude. But it may not be physical towers coming down. But there is chaos and destruction happening in your life. And where are you going? Who are you turning to? When tragedy strikes, we shall not fear. Rather, we should be courageous. Because God is our refuge and our strength, the very present help in our trouble. When tragedy strikes, we shall not fear.